In 1843, a wealthy English squire stood on the docks of Liverpool and watched his teenage daughter board a ship for America. He was certain she would fail. Before she left, he handed her a heavy gold chain holding a locket. He issued a specific condition. When the American wilderness finally broke her spirit, she only needed to send that locket back as a sign of her regret, and he would pay to bring her home. That 19-year-old was Fanny Smith. She was sailing away from her family, her inheritance, and the only world she had ever known. With the American frontier notoriously brutal, her father's wager rested on a simple timeline. He was betting on how many months the wilderness would need to break her and send the locket back across the Atlantic. The jewelry around her neck acted as a tangible, ever-present escape hatch. It turned her immigration into a constant, literal test between the comforts of her past and her religious convictions. Fanny was born on Christmas Day, the only child of her wealthy parents. She grew up in a comfortable Herefordshire estate, spending her days learning fine embroidery and being shielded from physical labor. In her late teens, she snuck out with friends to hear missionaries from America preach about a newly founded religion. The message resonated so deeply that she was secretly baptized into the Latter-day Saint faith in a freezing river, where they had to break the ice to perform the ordinance. Soon after, she compounded the scandal. She rejected the advances of the wealthy young squire next door, choosing instead to marry a young common bricklayer named George Spilsbury. Her father was furious. He tried to prevent her from leaving the country, and when he couldn't stop the marriage, he forbade her from taking any of her fine belongings or heirlooms with her to America. Fanny was stripped of her material safety net. She walked away from a guaranteed inheritance, choosing instead to chase an abstract religious promise into an unknown wilderness. The physical danger set in immediately. During their voyage on the ship Yorkshire, a violent squall in the Gulf of Mexico completely tore the masts and rigging off their vessel. When they finally anchored in New Orleans, the couple had $5 to their name. Fanny traded her remaining English clothes just to secure pots, pans, and passage up the Mississippi River. They settled in Nauvoo, Illinois, a city the pioneers were building by hand. One afternoon, a bullet fired by an angry mob whizzed past Fanny and struck the pan she was holding just as she stepped outside to do laundry. Despite the poverty and the constant threat of violence, she found a sense of peace. She met the church's founder, Joseph Smith, and felt anchored in her new faith. Every metric of her life, her physical safety, her wealth, her comfort, had plummeted. Yet her internal conviction held firm, and the locket stayed securely with her. The persecution in Illinois soon boiled over. After their prophet was murdered, the entire community abandoned their homes and fled across the frozen Mississippi River in the middle of winter. It was during this period of extreme exposure and chaos that Fanny became a mother, giving birth to 4 little girls in rapid succession. The conditions of the frontier exacted a devastating toll. Her first daughter died at less than a month old. The second lived barely 3 months. Within a few short years, all 4 of those children were dead. Back in England, her father had warned her that this country was ruthless and would break her heart. Now his prophecy had materialized completely. The locket was right there, offering an immediate return to safety. But surviving the loss of 4 children without turning back proved her endurance had forged into absolute devotion. By 1850, Fanny and George joined the ox-drawn wagon trek, heading further west toward the Salt Lake Valley. On the trail, Fanny contracted cholera. She was lying so still and so near death that the wagon company actually began digging her grave by the side of the road. She was saved only by the shock of going into labor. Right there on the riverbank, she gave birth to a son, Alma Platt, and her condition slowly began to stabilize. But the trials continued. Just 8 days later, their wagon lost its footing, rolled down a muddy embankment, and plunged directly into the river, taking the newborn down with it. The men searched the water and pulled the infant out alive. The family eventually reached Utah, where they fought off plagues of locusts and were relocated repeatedly to settle remote towns. Away from any medical care, Fanny would go on to bury 4 more of her children. The American frontier had systematically extracted the highest possible physical, financial, and emotional price from Fanny Smith. Through it all, the locket remained in her possession. Jump forward half a century to the year 1903. Fanny is 80 years old. The harsh life has taken its final physical toll, and she has been confined to a wheelchair for 12 years. Sitting in that chair, she holds a gold chain in her hand. The locket never crossed the Atlantic. In exchange for those decades of suffering, she and George built a family that now includes 63 grandchildren. Fanny viewed her decades of loss as a prerequisite for this survival. The deaths of her children and the loss of her health were the foundational costs of a community she helped drag out of the dirt. Her father had issued a straightforward warning based on the belief that extreme hardship creates regret. He assumed the pain of the frontier would eventually outweigh her faith. He failed to realize that for those moving west, conviction turns the act of suffering into an act of investment. Pain was no longer a reason to quit. It was a proof of devotion. As she neared the end of her 60-year ordeal, Fanny thought back to that day on the Liverpool docks. "I hold my locket in my hand," she wrote, "and I can hear my father say, 'Fanny, you'll be sorry.'" I was never sorry. No, there are no regrets.